I'm Michelle Graves, your host on today's segment of The Power of Money. I'm glad to have you here. Now, at The Power of Money, we are interested in three things happening. First, we want you to get the necessary education so that you and your family can make the decisions that will impact positively on you in your financial life. The second thing is that you be empowered to prosper. I only want the best for you. And you can only get that if you have education and then the drive to make it happen. And the third thing that is so important to me is that you recognize that life is more than a journey and that you be energized so that you can begin to participate in the truly joyous experience of living. So, here's to empowerment, here's to education, and here's to energy. I'm Michelle Graves, your host, Power of Money, and here we go. And here we go. It's my delight, honor, and privilege to be on the set today to cover for the next hour a subject that is near and dear, up close and personal to my heart, Michelle Graves, the Money Lady. We're talking about for the next hour, and please sit down and listen to this. It's going to be on YouTube. Tell your family members to listen to this because this is major. We're talking about Alzheimer's disease. The dirty word. But it's real and it's epidemic in this country. November is National Alzheimer's Disease Month and Family Caregiver Month. And I'm honored to have as my guest today Rachel Barley, who is a clinical program manager with the Alzheimer's Association of Miami Valley chapter in Dayton, Ohio. And she's graciously agreed to come and to answer my questions, to share information. And as I've shared over the years, knowledge is power. If you have an understanding, it will enable you to make good, sound financial decisions for your family. It will empower you to lay a plan out if necessary, and it will give you hope in circumstances that would otherwise be perceived as without hope. So without further ado, let me introduce my guest. She's coming in by way of Zoom. And how are you today, Rachel?
I'm doing good, Michelle. How are you?
I'm hanging in there. All winter is coming.
It is.
It's like, woo, driving up here from Cincinnati, I was like, you know what, it's cold out here. So, but anyway, let's start with, if you don't mind, what is Alzheimer's disease?
Sure, we get that question all the time. So Alzheimer's disease, I always explain it to people as a form of dementia. So I always tell people that dementia is the umbrella and Alzheimer's is one of the types of it below it. There's also Lewy bodies and Parkinson's, and so those are some of the other ones that they deal with, but it is a type of dementia.
Oh my God,
it is.
I did not know that. In the same family?
Yes, same family.
Okay, so when a person says to be delicate, they don't want to say that their family member has Alzheimer, so they say they have dementia. That is a kinder way of saying that condition. Is that correct?
That's very correct, yes. And they are often used interchangeably for that reason.
Okay, because I was going to say that, my goodness, Alzheimer is a unique creature.
It sure is.
I know. So can COVID-19 cause Alzheimer or dementia?
Say that again, Michelle. Sorry.
Can COVID-19 cause Alzheimer or dementia?
So COVID, the question, I'm sorry, I'm having trouble hearing you.
I understand. That technology will fail you, Rachel.
Yes.
It will fail you. I want to know, can COVID-19 cause Alzheimer or dementia?
Okay, there we go. COVID-19 causing Alzheimer's and dementia. Got it. Okay, sorry about that.
That's okay.
No, I wouldn't say that it caused it. It can definitely make it more challenging. And we've seen a lot of that. We've seen COVID-19, just like you and I were talking about before we went on the show, the nursing homes are definitely feeling the impact of COVID-19 and Alzheimer's and dementia and not being able to see their loved ones. With the lack of socialization that we're having right now in the COVID-19 world, it's definitely making dementia and Alzheimer's more challenging because they can't get out and do anything and they can't really get that socialization like we recommend them getting. So I wouldn't necessarily say it causes it, but it definitely makes it more challenging for sure.
So if they are not allowed to engage socially with other people, what happens?
So a lot of times what we're seeing in the nursing homes is a rapid decline. They are definitely declining quicker than before. But I will say some of the nursing homes are still really good about being able to do activities. They're just keeping them socially distanced, or they're giving them activities that they can do in their room.
Okay.
So they're still working that brain muscle, as I always say, but not necessarily in the same way that they were before.
Okay, so, but they're still isolated, correct?
Yes, the isolation is very real.
Oh my God. If a person is not in a nursing home, and we are dealing with COVID-19, and this is not going away. I don't believe it's going away anytime soon.
You are correct about that, I think.
I'm so sorry, but I think we're going to be with this thing for a little bit. And they're in the home because trying to get them into a facility today is not going to happen. What are your recommendations to families, the millions of families, millions, who are dealing with loved ones with this condition at home?
Absolutely. And more challenging in some cases at home than it would be in a nursing home. So a lot of times what I will tell individuals as far as caregivers is try to keep them active. So even if you're walking around the house, take the perimeter of your house and walk them around it just so that they get some movement. Take them out on the back porch so that they get some fresh air, and there's some real psychology behind vitamin D for sure, from the sun and things like that. We also have several activity at home resources on our website.
Okay.
alz.org/Dayton.
Okay, can you say that again? Can you say that again?
alz.org/Dayton.
Okay.
And if you type in activities at home or just activities, it'll bring up all of the resources and kind of give you some ideas on things to try.
Okay. I can only imagine that caregivers are being challenged with this condition in the home. And if a loved one's in a nursing home, what is proper response from family members? How do we engage? I
always encourage family members to continue to advocate. So yes, I understand that the nursing homes are short-staffed and that they're trying to keep up with all of their work in that, but at the same time, as a caregiver, you're right and helpful to know what's happening with your loved one. So I always tell caregivers to do those phone calls and to call a couple of different people if you have to until you get your answers so that you know what's going on with your loved one. Talk to the caregivers in the nursing home. Can they do FaceTime? Can they do Zoom calls like we're doing here today?
Okay.
Can they let the loved one have an actual phone? And so that way you can at least hear your loved one and kind of get a gauge of whether they're doing okay or not.
Okay.
We've also seen a lot of nursing homes do window visits.
Okay.
So it also depends on where your loved one is located. Because if they're inside a courtyard, you can't necessarily get to their window, but if they're on the outside and you can get to their window, maybe do some window visits that way.
Okay.
I know that there's also they're just now in Ohio starting to do outside visits. So a lot of times they'll have a setup outside with the plastic barriers on it, and that's how they can do visits.
Okay.
And then there's some others that are using certain rooms in the building. So all the visits have to be in just this room.
Okay.
But you're able to see your loved one face to face.
You are able with social distancing in place.
Correct.
Okay,
Correct.
that's very helpful. What are you hearing from other caregivers?
I think the biggest struggle is not being able to see their loved ones in the nursing home. The ones that have the loved ones in the facilities. So obviously we're glad that that's changing.
Yes.
That they're kind of starting to move towards some in-person. And then as far as caregivers at home, just like you were saying, it's definitely becoming more overwhelming than I think they anticipated it to be. Because when you go from maybe taking your loved one to a day program for a few hours every day, or an in-home caregiver comes in for a few hours every day, you get a break. Not a lot of caregivers are getting that break right now.
I agree. I think it's going to be a concern, particularly if the husband is there with her. And he is now subjected to that type of behavior with no break.
Absolutely.
I mean, no break. At least in a facility, he could come and visit and then go home. But at the point you're both in the same home and he has nowhere to go, that's a lot for a man.
It absolutely is. It's a lot for any of our caregivers to have to do that so much longer than they ever have before.
Right. So I see the potential from this COVID as having repercussions further on down the line in terms of mental health for people. I know that Alzheimer is brain deterioration, but we're looking at real issues around mental health from people not being able to get free.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So what impact do you feel that this social isolation is going to have on those living with Alzheimer? Because we can't bring in outsiders because you're scared of them catching something or being exposed. You're scared to get out among the public because you don't know whether you'll bring it home. So do you have any thoughts or observations about this whole issue of social isolation?
I definitely agree with you, Michelle. I think the mental health implication of this COVID is definitely going to be greater than some other things, for sure. As far as what we're kind of seeing from our end, with the adult daycares being closed, I think that that's a huge impact.
That is huge.
Because they don't have any place to go. And that the adult daycare also gave them that socialization. They were there with other people and they were doing activities all day. So we've really been telling caregivers to kind of find some little pockets. So if you have that person, whether it's a church member or a family member, or even our support groups, that you can pick up the phone and call and just say, I'm having a really bad day. I need to talk through some things, or I just need you to listen to me. You can't leave your house, but that kind of gives you a release, and don't keep it in. Because I think that when we keep things in, that's when we have more of those mental health
challenges,
repercussions, and we get very frustrated and angry and all those other emotions that come with keeping something in.
Well, I think that what I do, I joined an international organization of caregivers called the Memory Group. And it's been amazing because people type in their questions, concerns, they share experiences in dealing with their loved ones, because COVID is global. And it has absolutely been a godsend. So I do appreciate that technology, because it's such an open forum of different exchanges and people interfacing and sharing just their frustrations. A question I had, which surprised me, was how many younger people have Alzheimer?
Yes, early onset is definitely can definitely be more challenging. And so just to kind of help everyone understand what early onset is anyone under 65.
That
So a
gets
lot
it.
of people in their 40s and 50s
Yeah.
can be diagnosed with dementia, and that's what we call younger onset.
And how their families are coping with that.
Mm-hmm.
Married people, a wife all of a sudden finds out her husband at 45 years old has Alzheimer.
Yes.
Just devastating, just devastating. So what are recommendations? How do you, how do you have early detection? How do you find out about this is happening? Because so many
So
of
the
us are
early
in denial.
Yes, denial is a very real thing. Yes, and it can happen for the person with the diagnosis and for the caregiver. Yes. But as far as early stage or early diagnosis, it's the same diagnosis process regardless of what the age is. So we always recommend someone sees a neurologist. A lot of
Okay.
people like to go to their primary care physician, which is a great place to start. But as far as actually getting an actual diagnosis of Alzheimer's or dementia, the only way that that can happen is the brain scan. And so the best place to do that is with the neurologist. They can
Okay.
actually scan the brain and look at the nerve endings and the plaques and tangles and all that medical term that we don't really need to go into today.
Yeah, those plaques. Ugh.
But so we always recommend someone go to a neurologist and actually go through the cognitive testing and get the brain scan. And then that way you can determine whether what you have going on is actually a form of dementia or not.
Okay. I appreciate you saying that they go to a neurologist because I have sat in on meetings and the primary care doctor, I don't know where the industry is. I don't know why they don't make that type of referral and why they don't want to address this head on. Is it a lack of information out here in the medical industry?
I think a lot of it, a lot of what we see is a lot of people rely on their primary care physician,
Yes.
and so that's who they go to for everything.
Yes.
And so sometimes it's that loved one's going to the doctor by themselves, and
Yeah.
the caregiver's not necessarily saying these are the concerns that we see. So sometimes it's just that the primary care physician doesn't know that's what's happening. So we always tell the caregiver, you can't necessarily talk about your loved one in front of the doctor, which we totally understand.
Yes.
But make a separate phone call or send a letter. Somehow get that information to the primary care doctor so that they're aware that you have concerns, so that there's memory problems. Because then a lot of times, especially the really good primary care, will do a referral to neurologist.
Okay.
And with that medical backing, you can kind of use the doctor as a, well, your doctor said you had to do this type of situation.
Yes, which is
and
what
most
I
of
do
the
anyway.
time,
Yeah.
there's always going to be the exception. Most of the time, with that doctor behind you, you can get your loved one to go get the test.
Okay, because I was going to say that that is a component that really needs to be pushed, which is a general practitioner is not a specialist.
Yes.
And without being offensive to medical practitioners, I recognize value, but I truly recognize the power of specialization. If you have cancer, you go to an oncologist.
Sure.
I mean, that's just the way it is. And it has been a concern because it creates, in my opinion, a level of disinformation. And to tell a family, well, you know, she's old. Well, what does that mean?
Right. Right.
I mean, I'm old. You know, what does that mean? Well, you know,
Yes.
she's lived a good life. What does that mean? I just, it has brought out behaviors in me that I'm shameful about. I'm not kidding you, because I want them to do better, because this thing is epidemic and families have to be prepared for what it looks like. Now, it's my understanding that the FDA is reviewing a drug for potential
They
treatment?
are. It is in phase 3. And I'm
Phase
not
3?
even going to try to, phase 3. I'm not going to try to pronounce it because I will butcher it.
Okay.
But it is in phase 3. So we're hopeful about that. But what we've been telling everyone is we just don't know. I mean, they could go through all of this and it could be released, and it could actually do something. They could go through all of this and they could say, nope, we're not releasing this. So we're really just kind of waiting to see what the FDA says, and what they kind of approve and what they don't approve, but it has gone through several trials already.
So my question is this the only particular drug that's on the horizon that's in clinical trials right now?
It's the only one that we're aware of. They're always doing research and adding to things, but this one's far enough along that they're comfortable enough to let us know about it, and let us know that it's been enough, it's been tested enough to be in that process.
Okay.
And at that point.
Do you know if it is dealing with early signs, or is it people that actively have that disease that they're doing the trials on? Do you know any?
It's dealing with active disease. So what they're testing right now is all of the drugs that are currently on the market, the Aricepts, the Namendas, things like that, just treat the symptoms. I always explain to people, it's just like dealing with the flu. The current medications that we have with the flu right now just kind of help us manage those symptoms.
Right.
That's very much what Aricept and Namenda do. So this new drug that they have, they're actually looking at the possibility of it decreasing the decline. So it would actually help you not decline as much and not progress as fast in the disease.
Okay, I understand. And that doesn't seem to be a challenge until you enter into the latter stages where the decline seems to accelerate.
Yes, so a lot of people say, and there's still research going on in this, but a lot of caregivers tell us that between the early stage and the middle stage, they see a big decline. And that makes sense because the middle stage is the longest and most common stage. That's where a lot of the behaviors take place. That's where a lot of the personality changes come in. And so it makes sense that when you're from the early stage, which in most cases they can have a conversation like you and I are having, and they move into the middle stage, you would see a huge decline.
Circular.
Yes. And so there's no actual research proof of that. We're just, a lot of caregivers say they see a big drop off from that stage.
Okay. Well, I know for myself, the first time I saw a brain, by background and training, I'm a biochemist, so I'm not uncomfortable with brains and all that kind of stuff. But the first time years ago, I saw what a brain looked like with Alzheimer and the plaques and how it looked like gummy, the whole frontal gummy, and I got it. I understood why a person could not remember anything recent because the back part was fine, but the front was just like a tangled mess.
Yes. Yeah. When you talk about your brain, basically what it's doing is killing off nerve endings. And if you can't use those nerve endings, then your brain doesn't process the way that it normally would.
People need to know that it's not a condition that's going to get better. Is that a fair statement?
That is a very fair statement. Yes. Yes. Dementia is definitely, unfortunately, fatal.
And is it true that a person usually dies from not the disease itself, but all of the other things, like the brain forgets to tell the heart to beat?
Yes. Yes, that is very true. And when you look at dementia itself, it can come into play with this COVID situation. It's a perfect example of immune compromisation. So their immune system is compromised to begin with because all of their brain is not there.
Right.
So you are automatically at risk to get a lot of other things.
Okay, I got it. And that's one of the things they have to be careful about in a nursing environment is because the nursing homes are sick people.
Yes.
They're full of sick people. So I would have to believe that if a person has that condition and they're exposed to other sick people, the possibility increases as opposed to them being at home. Is that a possibility?
It's a possibility for them to get, I mean, whether they're at home or not, just like this pandemic. I mean, I think it's, when you look at Alzheimer's and dementia, they're at risk for a lot of other things because they have this diagnosis or they have this disorder. And so I think you have to be careful no matter where they are. But you are very correct in nursing homes. You are around a lot more people that have potential of who knows what.
Yeah, you're
and it's
right.
definitely at a higher risk.
You're
Yes.
right. You're right. I had a profound epiphany the first of this year where my mother had to go into the hospital for an extended stay because of sepsis. That was a result of, we did not know, of UTI. And I lived at the hospital. I actually moved in and I lived there until she was moved to a facility, a rehab facility, to learn how to do everything all over again. And I will tell you, I need to write a book because that opened up my eyes to, we have to be careful about criticizing facilities because they don't have the staff, the best ones. That's a hard job. That's a hard job. I mean, that's a hard job. And I will also say that not all Alzheimer personalities are the same. Some people are very pleasant, but some people, particularly males, it gets pretty intense. It can. I've seen some things.
It can, yes. We always say when you know one person with dementia, you know one person, because it's going to present itself very differently in everybody.
Right. So I was able to observe and to see that whole thing, but I also definitely feel that the staff is under stress and that families need to recognize that the nursing home cannot do it all. And that families have to take responsibility for their loved one there. And I would just tell you, the whole time I was there, I saw so few families come in to see the patient. I didn't. Once in a blue moon, I would see a family member come in. And they would stay for maybe 30 minutes and then they would leave. And I do, in all fairness, Rachel, I understand the stress of seeing a loved one become someone that you don't even know. But they're still humans.
Yes, they are.
And they have feelings. And I think with Alzheimer, that may be amplified. What are your thoughts?
So it's funny that you say that, because I always tell caregivers that very statement. Just because they have dementia does not mean they're not still a person. And I always talk to them about the sense of self and keeping their independence for as long as we possibly can. That may look different as they progress, but we want to try to keep their independence as long as we can. Okay. So I was talking about that middle stage earlier. They've become very emotion based. It's all about how it makes them feel, not necessarily about the fact part of it or the rationalization part of it. They are all about how it makes them feel. And that's hard to make an adjustment as a human, because we're used to, well, this is the facts and this is how it really goes and this is what it really is. And they don't do that. They do based on how they feel.
That can be a challenge in a family. It can be. It can be a challenge because and I don't know why they can get stuck on something. They will get stuck on a situation is not fact, but they're stuck, and they will continue to revisit that. You'll try to shift them into something else, change the subject, change the conversation, and they will, Rachel, they will take it right back. And you're like, what?
You are so right, Michelle, so right. You and every other caregiver on this planet tells those stories.
Oh my gosh, you're like, am I crazy today? But anyway, it has been, there's so much that needs to be done. When we talk about caregivers, and of course in November, along with National Alzheimer's Disease, the focus is also on caregivers. Do you know how many caregivers there are out here right now?
I knew you were going to ask me that.
Oh, that's okay.
There's 16 million,
Whew,
about 16 million Americans.
and I bet a bunch of them are females.
Almost
Oh.
half of them are female.
Right, who are trying to juggle their own families and jobs.
Yes.
And mom or dad, or both.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of times when we say the female, we'll get questions about, well, why is that? Why is it predominantly females that do the caregiving? And our answer to that always is, it's females that kind of do everything most of the time.
Yes.
We're the moms, we're the homemaker, we're the caretaker, and that's just kind of the role that women tend to take on. I have known some really good men caregivers though, so let's put that out there.
Okay, thank you.
I have seen some that have taken on that role with their mom or their aunt or something like that. So it does happen. It's just predominantly women that take on all those roles.
Okay, so when we talk about your neck of the woods, the Miami Valley, how many people would you say are impacted in your area with this?
We're looking at an estimated of 100,000 people in just the Miami Valley, and that's what we know.
100,000 people? Rachel, that's a lot of people.
Very big number, yes.
I mean, I don't even know what the policy implications of that would be. So,
and then if we look at Ohio as a state, it's
yes.
604,000.
604,000
yes.
people?
And those are just the ones that we know.
Oh my gosh. That's staggering. And
it is a staggering number.
If you multiply it out into nationally, then it explains why we are in an epidemic.
Absolutely, yes.
Where does this come from? At least we can identify the COVID, but where does this disease come from? Is it genetic? Is it environmental? What is it? The food we eat? What is it?
So genetics is definitely a component.
Okay.
So if you have a family member, a sister, a brother, a grandma, some close family member that has it, you're definitely at higher risk. But the biggest risk factor is age. And so people, once they hit that 65 and older, they are at higher risk to develop this.
Really? So it is age driven?
Yes, yes.
Wow. That's good to know. Tell me about this State of Ohio Alzheimer plan.
Yes, so Ohio is one of the few states that until recently did not have an actual state plan. Through all of the work of our wonderful public policy team up there in Columbus, we were able to get them to pass that. So recently, we have passed a bill that we are able to create the plan. So in the next 18 months, they are actually looking at a plan for how we're going to take care of the Ohioans that have a diagnosis of dementia.
So the state is now involved?
Yes, the state is now involved. It's at a state level.
Is it their financial support going to be a part of this?
They're doing financial
platform?
support, and they have people from the state health department and people like that that are a part of the team that are coming to the table to help.
Okay, that is good to know. That is very good to know. Why do you feel this is important? I know how I would feel. This is very important to me, but how do you feel about that?
So I think it's important from a unanimous standpoint, and everybody needs to be kind of on the same page. And so right now we have a lot of, here they're doing it this way, here they're doing it that way, here they're doing it maybe a different way. So what the state plan is going to help do is to get everybody on the same page. When we have someone that has Alzheimer's and dementia, this is the things that we're going to do. And this is the steps that everybody's going to take that's involved in their care.
Uniform steps.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's so important across the state.
I think that's very, because you cannot seem to get information that is consistent and uniform.
Yes.
I mean, I'm just saying this. I think that would be very, very important. I think that would be very, very important. How How can the association utilize volunteers? I know volunteers are very important.
Oh, without our volunteers, we would not exist, Michelle. I tell you, we have some of the best volunteers out there. I know everyone says that, but we really do, I promise. So we have a couple of things that our volunteers can do. Right now, we're doing everything on Zoom, which is why this is how I'm meeting with you today.
Okay.
We also are doing our education programs this way. So one of the things that volunteers can do is to sign up to be a community educator, and they can actually help us educate the general public on all of our topics and actually do some of those presentations for our education programs.
That is powerful. Zoom is powerful. I mean, you can present to hundreds of people at the same time. The only challenge is that the technology, because older people typically don't have computers.
Yes, yeah, and so we also have partnered with, we're also partnering with some organizations, some doctors' offices are even doing it for us, and that way they can be the holder of the technology and kind of help any of their constituents or clients kind of work through some of that technology.
Okay.
So we can also do it that way.
That's a very
we also
interesting
have our support
concept.
groups.
Okay. Go on, please.
And those are done by telephone right now, but we're getting ready to transition them to Zoom.
Okay.
We were talking about the isolation before. A lot of people want to see each other.
Yeah.
So they really want it to be on Zoom rather than just pick up the telephone. So we are going to do that option here in the next couple months.
Wow. Well, let's talk about shifting because time is moving quickly. You all offer education and support services at the Miami Valley Alzheimer's Association for people that are living with the disease. Can you go into a little bit of detail about that?
Sure. So I've already mentioned our support groups and our education. Our support groups are primarily focused for caregivers.
Okay.
And so we were talking earlier about how the caregivers need to really focus on taking care of themselves.
Yes.
That's what our support groups really focus on. A lot of our facilitators are volunteers, so that's another way that everybody can volunteer. They either are current caregivers or have been caregivers, so they get it.
Okay.
And so our caregiver support groups, we have 15 of them right now across our service area.
Okay.
And they're being done virtually. So that's definitely something caregivers can do. We also, as a social worker, which is what my title is, they give me the clinical program manager as a fancy title, but I'm basically a social worker. We meet with families one-on-one with what we call care consultations.
Okay.
And so I will sit down with caregivers, really any caregiver that wants to be a part of it, and we will walk through some of the challenges that they're dealing with and make a plan for dealing with those, giving them resources so that they walk away from the meeting with next steps.
That is very powerful. How do you join?
So as far as our education and our support group groups for caregivers, you can go back to that alz.org/Dayton, and you'll see at the very bottom, you'll have the option for education and support groups.
Okay.
There's a programs and services right there in the middle of the screen.
Okay, now my question to you, and I don't expect you to have the answer, but this show does broadcast nationally. So would there be Alzheimer organizations throughout the United States that are similarly patterned in terms of support groups and help?
Yes, so we are a national organization, and if you just drop off that Dayton, so it's alz.org, and you can get the chapter anywhere in the country.
My goodness. And so all of you all are working in a collaborative way, perhaps, to push this agenda. That is very, very good. That is very, very, very good. Do you have any tips on how to manage caregiver stress as a support recommendation?
Caregiver stress, it's definitely something we're dealing with right now. So I mentioned having someone to kind of release things to. And that is whether it's your pastor at church, whether it's your friend down the street, whether it's a family member, make sure that you have someone that you can.
Oh, something happened with our Zoom.
Happy to be that sounding
Okay.
board as well.
Okay.
You can use our 24/7 helpline, 1-800-272-3900. And our
Okay.
care consultants are available 24/7. They are happy to talk through anything, just be a listening board, even if it's 2 a.m. and the caregivers at their wits' end, they can't handle it anymore.
I
Our care
know the
consultants are
feeling.
there.
Yeah. That is very, so it's literally an active 24/7
Yes,
line.
yes.
Well, listeners and viewers, I would encourage you, if you're walking down this road, to take advantage of this. For real. 2 a.m, I don't know what it is about nighttime.
Very true.
I don't know what it is. Is it that the brain has a hard time resting?
Mm-hmm.
That's what it is. And getting them into a place of rest.
Yes. And the nighttime, I think, it's our time to think about everything, because everything is kind of settled and we're not focused on anything else. And that's when our mind starts twirling like crazy.
Goodness gracious. I don't know. Oh, there's so much I want to ask. And I guess there is an end to this. And I guess every family deals with it differently. I have an aunt in Kokomo that has been, she's been Alzheimer diagnosed for over 20 years, and she's still. So what is the typical longevity with a person that's been diagnosed?
It really depends. I mean, and I know that that's not the answer that every caregiver wants me to give when they ask that, but it depends, because not everybody gets diagnosed at the same point in time.
Oh, okay.
So a lot of times they will, if they get diagnosed, they may be already in the middle stages, or they may be in the very beginning stages.
Okay.
So it just really, that's why we're always advocating for early diagnosis. The earlier people can get diagnosed, the better it is. And that's part of where this state plan came from. We're hoping that as part of the Ohio state plan, that we can advocate and get everybody across the state on board to get that early diagnosis in place.
Oh, I think that's essential. And the other thing is that, and the state of Ohio does have partnership with long-term care insurance carriers who will provide, they do now, they don't talk about it, but I think that families need to know if that runs in your family genetically, I think you should consider getting an insurance product to pay for the care, because it can get expensive. Have you heard those kind of comments from people about?
Yes, caregivers tell us that all the time. We always tell people to plan. Plan as much as you possibly can. And that's the other reason for the early diagnosis. I can't stress the early diagnosis enough, because it just sets things up and makes the whole process so much easier. So if you get a diagnosis in the early stages, then that loved one is able to be a part of that planning process.
Okay.
So you know what they want to happen at the end of their life. If you get it later, they may not have the cognitive capacity to be involved. And so then families are left to make those decisions and just kind of guess.
I understand. That is extremely powerful, what you said in terms of early diagnosis and detection. And then the family member can participate in that whole experience. What happens with families? Have you seen families fall apart completely behind this, like dissension between family members in terms of how to respond to mom or dad? Have you encountered that?
That's basically why we even have something similar to our care consultations, because that's kind of a lot of what we talk about is the family dynamics. Maybe mom is, because she lives with dad every day, she's dealing with it a little bit different than the adult children that only see him on his really good day. Every family member is going to process it differently. We always tell family members there's definitely a product of grief in this, because they're not the same person that they were 2 weeks ago or 3 months ago or 3 years ago. So you definitely have to work through whatever feelings that family is dealing with. And that's where we can come in. And if it's not working for the family to have that meeting themselves and they can't work through it themselves, that's where we can come in and kind of be the mediator and help them kind of process some of those feelings and get
Okay.
to a good place for that person.
Because one of the concerns I have is when you have entire families in denial, and this person is doing things that are just different. And everyone is proceeding on as if, well, you know, it's not that bad. And I'm saying this because I've seen it happen so many times, and I'm just trying to understand, how do families anticipate and then plan appropriately? If you see dad acting oddly, and I do mean there are indicators, because that there are things that just are not what I consider normal, that some of them will begin to do. And
Yes,
yet the
repetition is very common.
repetition.
Dad will ask you this question, and then 5 minutes later, he's asking you the question
Yes.
again.
Yes.
The phase of your relationship where you answer the question again is
Yes.
probably the best.
You have to remember
I
that.
always tell caregivers,
The
you're going to get
phase where
really
you-
good at repeating yourself.
And sometimes they do know they're repeating themselves, but they do it anyway.
Yes, yes. And I always tell caregivers, you know, the silver lining in all of this is a lot of times your loved one's not going to remember the things you don't want them to remember. So if there is
Oh.
something that is tragic happening, like I had a caregiver not too long ago that her husband just died.
Oh my goodness.
And she's the one that has dementia, but her husband recently passed away. And so the
Okay.
family was debating whether they were going to take her to the funeral or not.
Okay.
And I encouraged them to do so because they had been married for 54 years or
Okay.
55 years.
Okay.
And so she's going to want to be a part of that. She's not necessarily going to remember all of it. So I
Okay.
told them the silver lining is she's not going to remember it like you do.
Okay. But nonetheless, because she's still human and because she
Yes.
still has emotions, she should be a part of that activity, even though she cannot do the planning. But she
Absolutely.
still was the spouse.
Absolutely.
That's good. That's good to know, because I really don't know the appropriate response when you see so many of their friends transitioning. And should you expose them? Should you even tell them, or just let it be?
So I always tell caregivers it really depends on the person. If you
Okay.
have a loved one that is able to, you know, openly talk about their diagnosis and they're aware of that there's memory issues and that they may have those challenges, then I say a lot of those things are okay. If you have someone that is really kind of struggling and not able to process things, and you can really see that they are really kind of getting stuck in that feeling of maybe towards depression or sadness or something like that, then maybe those you keep out of it less. Maybe you don't get them as involved. So you really just
Okay.
kind of have to look at the loved one and what they're able to handle at that point in time, and then kind of just work from there.
Well, if they are not going to remember the incident, then perhaps you shouldn't even bring it up. If they're not going to
And
retain the
people,
thought.
it's best not to, yes.
I mean, because I'm serious when I shared with you about seeing in a lab a brain and the ganglia looked like little worms. It was the most horrible thing. And I said, well, I certainly understand why they can't remember anything, because it's just like a hornet's nest. I mean, it's just horrible. So I just wondered. I had been reading one book that a social worker had given me some time ago, and she loaned it, and then she just said, well, just keep it because you won't give it back. But it was a very, very good book, and basically it said that agree with them on everything. Don't disagree. And that
Yes,
gets back to the
yeah,
emotions.
disagreement- only gets you in trouble. That's what I always tell people.
Disagreement only gets you in trouble. So if they say that I saw, just examples because I hear it all the time, they say that there are two little kids in the bedroom and we need to get them out. Do you say to them, there are no children in the bedroom? What are you talking about? Or do you say, we'll get them out later and change the subject?
You absolutely change the subject.
Change the subject.
I had one caregiver who was a pastor. His wife always accused him of stealing things, particularly her purse.
Yes.
Or there were people coming in and stealing it.
Yes.
He would tell her, they did. I chased them down the driveway and I got it back.
Okay. So that's a nice lie, but it's effective.
Yeah, we call them therapeutic fibs.
Okay, I love it. Listen, our time has run out.
Oh, wow, that went by fast.
I told you, it goes very, very fast. I would like, again, for you to give contact information for your organization and a phone number.
Sure, yes. So you can reach the Alzheimer's Association, the Miami Valley chapter, on our local line. It's 937-291-3332. And then our 24/7 helpline, which is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, is 800-272-3900.
I appreciate the information you've shared openly. I love your interview style, totally transparent. This has been wonderful and it has been extremely enlightening to me. And I do believe that we've got to come to a solution. I'm sorry that it had to get to crisis for us to recognize that this situation has to be addressed. Families are impacted. But I want to thank you for giving your time. And for those of you that are tuning in to the Power of Money, I'm your host, Michelle Grace, and as always, it's been a deep pleasure. I hope you've learned some things. I hope you have ordered your steps appropriately. And as always, I send you love and I give you hope. Bye-bye.